Join the coven. I think I accidentally joined a cult. Part 1. A story written by the Globetrotter. Hey Reddit. I don't know how to start this story. I'm not entirely sure that this is one yet, to be honest. I guess I'll just get into it then. I'll start with a little backstory. I met Henry when I was 5 years old. I had just moved to a new city in Pennsylvania with my parents. My first day of kindergarten was just one short week after we had moved into our new home. My town, which I plan to leave nameless for obvious reasons, is quite small. At its peak, the entire town was home to less than 1,000 residents. The children in my class had essentially grown up together, and the majority of them showed no interest in letting me join the community. Kids can be cruel. Fortunately, Henry was in my class. He had lived in the town his whole life, but had never made any friends. He always believed it was because he was unlikable. But I blame his parents. They'd always kept him pretty sheltered, and frankly, they never seemed to be the social types themselves. Needless to say, Henry and I connected rather quickly. We moved through elementary and middle school as best friends, and promised to stay that way forever. During the summer, after my 8th grade year, my father was offered a job in California that paid more than his current one had. A lot more, to put it simply. It didn't take long for us to pack up the house and make the trip to the West Coast. Henry and I were devastated and vowed to stay in contact. We had made plans to meet up for Christmas that year. California opened up a whole new chapter to my life. I thrived in my new high school, deciding to ditch the anxiety I'd gained from my old town for a newfound confidence. Here, I met the love of my life, Lily. I had never expected to fall in love. Of course, but that kind of thing isn't always planned, is it? Lily and I dated throughout all 4 of my high school years. As time went on, and I began to make more friends, my relationship with Henry started to fade. I found myself ignoring more of his texts and calls, and before I knew it, I would go months before saying anything to him. I still regret ever letting that happen. I can't begin to explain how lucky I felt when Lily told me that she planned on keeping our relationship going throughout college. Even though she had been accepted to her dream college across the country, in Texas. It was tough at times, of course, but Lily was special. I couldn't let this one go. Lily and I are graduated now. I apologize if all this information feels rushed to you. I just feel that this information is important for your understanding of the events of the past few days. We are both fairly confident that we are made for one another, so Lily had quickly taken up the offer to move in with me. After a long discussion, we decided to move to no other than my hometown in Pennsylvania. I love Lily a lot. I hope to start a family with her someday, if I don't get myself killed first. My concerns began just 2 days ago. Throughout our final year of college, we had started to save up some extra cash in preparation for moving in together. Upon arriving in town a week ago, the 2 of us headed straight for the apartment complex that we had set up to live in. It wasn't very fancy or expensive, but Lily and I didn't need much space. Not yet, at least. We met with the landlord that day, a short, chubby man who I can only describe as jolly. He was very likable, yet was firm in demanding we pay his asking price. Lily and I had no problems with this, as we were confident that we'd be able to afford the expense. 2 nights ago, I had walked into the apartment in the early evening. "Lily, you home?" I called out, shutting the door behind me. "Kitchen," she called, a smile forming across my face. It still felt so good to hear that. She was in our kitchen. I stepped into the tiny kitchen, setting the bag of Chinese food on the counter. "Living fancy tonight, I see," she said, giving me a quick kiss. I laughed. I figured we could use a break from ramen for one night. Lily smiled. "I'm happy you were the first to say it," she said, running her fingers through her dark hair, "because I was getting tired of that crap." I opened up the cabinet, removing both of our 2 plates and setting them next to the bag of food on the counter. "Any luck today?" She sighed, shaking her head. "Nothing." I frowned. Same here. Lily rubbed my arm. "Don't worry, Tom. Someone's gotta hire one of us at some point." "Yeah, I know," I said, sighing. "Just wish they'd hurry up already." She smiled once more, taking a carton of chicken lo mein out of the bag. "If them hurrying means I get to eat more of this, then I agree." I opened my mouth to reply, but the sound of my cell phone ringing from my pocket caught my attention. I looked up to Lily, who was eyeing me with a smirk on her face. "You better answer that." I pulled my phone out of my pocket. An unknown number plastered on the screen. I cleared my throat, stepped out into the living room, hoping for the best. I answered the call and placed the phone up to my face. "Hello? Hey, is this Thomas?" a nervous voice asked, throwing me off. I nodded for some reason. "Yes, this is Thomas. Who am I speaking with?" I said, giving Lily a look, who was now watching me from the kitchen doorway. "It's me," the voice said, sounding almost offended. I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number," I said, preparing to hang up the phone. "Thomas, it's me, Henry," my old friend said, causing my brow to furrow. "Oh hell, Henry," I said, Lily frowning from the doorway. "It's been a while, huh?" he said. "Yeah, you could say that," I said, rubbing my forehead. "I saw on Facebook a few days ago that you were back in town," he said, sounding just as awkward as he used to be. I chuckled. Yeah, just a few days ago," he grunted. "That's great. That really is," he said, trailing off. "Yeah," I said, turning to Lily. I wasn't really sure where to take the conversation from there. I never expected that talking to Henry would feel that odd. But there I was. "Yeah, well, I was curious if you wanted to hang out again," he asked. "Since it's been so long and all." I frowned, taken by surprise once again. "Oh, yeah, sure, man, that would be fun." Henry remained silent for a moment before continuing. "Oh, awesome. I'm free tomorrow if you want to do something then." I gave Lily a look once more. She returned my gaze with a look of confusion as she mouthed the word, "What?" "I'd have to get back to you on that one," I said, scratching my chin. "I'm not sure that I'll have much time tomorrow." "Yeah, of course," Henry said, sounding relieved. "I was thinking we could go fishing again, like old times." Yeah, man, that would be fun, I said. Can I call you back later? Yeah, sure thing, he said, clearing his throat. Talk to you then. I said goodbye and hung up the phone. I turned to Lily, who stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. Who was that? Do you remember Henry, my old friend I used to tell you about? He just called. He said he wants to meet up tomorrow, I said, walking towards her. Lily smiled. Aw, that's so sweet, she said, touching my arm as I walked into the kitchen. What time are you heading out? I looked back at her, scooping up some of the noodles onto my plate. I don't even know if I am going yet, Lily. Lily scoffed. Oh, come on, Tom. You need to go. I shrugged, taking a seat at our cheap kitchen table. I don't know. I was planning on heading back out to search tomorrow. Lily sighed, walking up to me. Take a day off, Tom. I'm going to be looking anyways. It'll be good for you. I nodded. Yeah, you're probably right. Geez, I haven't even talked to him in over a year now. She smiled. You've gotta go. You used to always tell me about how you... she said, cutting herself off with a scream. I spun, matching the direction she was facing. My eyes reached the window just in time to see a man dart out of sight. I pushed myself from the table, placing my hands on Lily's arms. Get into the bedroom, I said, stepping around her and jogging to the front door. Thomas, she shouted, fear in her voice. It'll be fine, I said. Opening the front door, I shut it behind me, walking briskly out into the street. I looked in both directions, finally spotting a man in dark clothing, sprinting at full speed down the road. Hey! I shouted, starting to run towards him. It didn't take me very long to slow down to a complete stop. The man was much faster than I was. I stopped, swearing under my breath. The man did not slow down, disappearing around the corner at the end of the road. I groaned, rubbing my face as I began to walk back to my apartment building. I was appalled. We had made sure that this was a safe area before renting the apartment, and yet we had already had a suspicious man peering into our windows. Not a great start. I began to walk up my driveway to the front door. When the thought crossed my mind to check the side of the building, I pivoted on my heel, instead swinging around the corner of the apartment to reach the side window. A lump instantly formed in my throat. On the ground, on top of the pebbles that lay around the many bushes, sat a pocket knife. The knife wasn't open, but there it sat, the blade folded into the black hilt. Against my better judgment, I didn't tell Lily about the knife, nor did I let her call the police. I told her that it had been just some local kids screwing around outside. I didn't sleep that night. Lily's soft breathing filled my ears as I waited for a crash from the living. A knock on the window. Anything. Nothing. I was still awake when Lily woke up the next morning. She got dressed, gave me a kiss goodbye, and went out in search for a job of any kind. I, on the other hand, had to get ready to meet an old friend. Yesterday morning I was sitting on the beach by the lake. That was only a short drive from my apartment complex. This is where Henry and I would come with our fathers back when we were kids. Many Saturdays have been spent just sitting by the water and chatting with one another. I miss the simplicity of childhood. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was 10:24 now, and Henry had promised to be there by 10 o'clock. I sighed, looking over my shoulder. I saw nothing but trees, my car out next to the road on the edge of the beach. A vibration from my phone caught my attention. The screen lit up, an unknown number in white text over a gray background. I sighed. I really needed to add Henry as a contact. I pressed the green button and sat at the bottom of the screen and placed the phone up to my ear. Hey, Henry, where are you, man?
When the time comes, take the offer.
It was almost inhuman, in a disturbing way. The voice was too deep in pitch to come from a normal human. It sounded almost as if it were coming in through a filter of some kind. I'm sorry, who is this? I said, checking over my shoulder once again. I was still on edge after what happened with the strange man from the night before.
When the time comes, you must take the offer.
The voice said once again.
Or you will never see her again.
I sighed, looking back out to the lake. I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong number, I said, ending the call and setting the phone into the cup holder of my folding chair. I sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the lake and the forest behind me. My mind began to wander. I surely had to go to the police, didn't I? What were the chances that this was the same man I had seen the night before? I shook my head. For all I knew, it had been just a prank call. No one I knew from my childhood had any reason to hate me. So why would I be targeted for something like that? The cracking of a twig behind me caused me to spin. Startled, Henry waved his hand sheepishly as he approached. Hey, Tom. Sorry I'm late. I got held up at home. I stood, relieved that I wasn't alone anymore. No worries, Henry, I said, holding open my arms. I pulled Henry into an awkward bro hug. It's been way too long, man. Yeah, it really has, he said, pulling away from me. I'm glad we're doing this, finally. Yeah, I grunted, anxiety suddenly coursing through me. Hey, you didn't just call me, right? Henry frowned, confused. No, I didn't. At least, I don't think I did. Why? Never mind, I said, sitting down in my chair again. I wanted to change the topic. Well, here we are. Just like old times, huh? True. Just our old men aren't here with us, he said, setting up his own chair next to mine. I didn't think he'd be down with flying in from California, I said, sparking a chuckle from Henry. That's right, he said, plopping down beside me. We don't need them anyways. I adjusted myself in the chair, getting comfortable. My hands covered the lid of the styrofoam container of worms, prying it off. So, what's new since I last talked to you? Henry shrugged, setting up his own fishing rod. Nothing too crazy if I'm being honest, he said, giving me a brief smile. I've got a girl now. I raised an eyebrow, sticking a worm onto my rod's hook. Oh, really? What's her name? Henry smiled, seemingly feeling pride when talking about her. Hannah. I nodded approvingly. What's she like? Well, he said, looking out over the lake. She's just amazing. I chuckled. Yeah, I know what you mean, I said, casting my fishing rod onto the lake. I feel the same way about my girlfriend, too. Henry cast his line out, in an opposite direction from my own. Lily, right? I nodded, hesitant. I hadn't mentioned her name yet. Yeah. Henry must have sensed my suspicion. Facebook. I nodded, feeling stupid. Right, I said, embarrassed. I needed to calm down. How long have you known her? He asked, setting his rod down. You boys don't mind if I sit up next to you, do you? A voice asked from behind. Henry and I immediately spun around. Before us stood a man, probably 6 feet tall, wearing a black t-shirt and khaki cargo shorts. He looked like he was 40 years old, at the very least. His face was covered in a finely trimmed beard, as black as the hair on his scalp. I looked briefly at Henry before nodding. Yeah, sure, we don't mind. The man flashed a toothy smile, moving closer towards us. "That is mighty polite of you two, letting an old man like me stick around. Fishing is always better with others to talk to anyways," he said, setting down his fishing gear on the ground beside him. "So, what do you go by?" I hesitated before speaking. "I'm Thomas. You can call me Tom," I said, looking to Henry. My old friend remained silent, staring at the man. "This is Henry," I said, motioning towards him. The man smiled once more, setting himself down in the dirt by the shore. "Nice to meet you, Tom. Henry," he said, nodding to each of us. "You can call me David." "Likewise," I said, reeling in my fishing rod a few turns. "So, what brings you two out here?" David asked, not breaking eye contact. "This is our first time meeting after 8 years," Henry said, finally speaking up. David nodded. "Well, that's very nice. Nothing like getting back together with old friends." Henry spoke this time. "I'm from around the area. Tom just moved back after living in California for a few years." David raised his eyebrows. "Oh, really now? Where are you working?" I narrowed my eyes. "Nowhere. Not yet, at least," I said. "My girlfriend and I have been searching for work for the past week now." David smiled. "I'm actually looking for a few new delivery men for my own business," he said. "And I think you're the kind of young man I'm looking for." I tilted my head, shocked. "Really?" I asked, sitting up in my chair. "Deliveries, huh? How much do you pay?" David didn't hesitate. 25. I frowned again. 25? As in dollars? David nodded. "Yes." I turned to Henry, a look of confusion on my face. "Per hour?" David laughed. "Yes, Thomas. And all I have to do is deliver stuff for you?" I asked. This was absurd. Half of me warned that this was impossible, that there was some extreme catch to this job, but the other half told me that I needed to take this chance. "That's it, my new friend," David said, a smile plastered on his face. "Hey," Henry cut in, "I'm actually unemployed at the moment. If you know." David chuckled. "Of course, the offer extends to you both." "This is unbelievable. If you don't mind me saying it," I said, shaking my head. "What are we even delivering anyways?" David raised his eyebrows. "My company values customer anonymity. You just deliver the packages like a postal worker." I nodded, taking in the information. At the time, I didn't really think about how shady this whole thing sounded. But don't worry. Now it's all I can think about. I turned to Henry, forgetting entirely about our fishing trip. "Well, what's the location like?" David simply smiled. "Want to take a ride?" We pulled into a parking lot of the warehouse about 15 minutes later. It was pretty far out in the middle of nowhere, relatively speaking. David pulled into a parking lot. We pulled into the parking lot of the warehouse about 15 minutes later. It was pretty far out in the middle of nowhere, relatively speaking. David pulled into a parking spot next to the front door, the only one with the sign sitting in front of it. The sign was bright red, thick white letters spelling "Reserved" on the front of it. Besides our own vehicle, there was currently only 2 other cars in the lot. I turned to David. "Where is everyone?" David looked over his shoulder at me. "I gave everyone the day off today," he said, shutting off the car. "They've been working really hard lately, so I wanted to reward them." I smiled then, removing my seatbelt. I was starting to feel better about the job. The boss seemed like a super nice guy. And I would be paid an incredible $25 an hour? It sounded too good to be true. It still very well could be. I stepped outside the car, shutting the door behind me. The outside of the warehouse was mostly empty, save for the name of David's company in large letters on the front. Obviously, I won't be naming that company here. Henry stepped out of the front seat, walking around the car to my side. Looks cozy, doesn't it? I nodded absently. Does any of this seem off to you? Henry shrugged. Sure, a little. Let's just see what's going on inside. I grunted lightly as David pulled open the front door of the building. Come on, boys. No need to be shy. Henry and I shared a glance before stepping up onto the sidewalk that was in front of the door. The door was made of a very foggy glass, so much so that I couldn't see through it. Stepping inside, I was met with a blast of cold air in my face. The warehouse was freezing cold. Rows and rows of cardboard boxes filled the entirety of the room, stacked on top of tables and shelves. A small building sat in the back corner of the warehouse, with a single gray door resting in the wall beside it. I stepped further into the building, examining the room. This place is pretty big, David. The man nodded, walking towards the office. Take a look around, he said, looking back over his shoulder. Just don't open anything. I'll be back shortly. I nodded, turning to Henry. He was staring up at the ceiling, seemingly at the large lights that lined it. What do you think? Henry looked at me. I don't know, man. It seems legit enough to me. I nodded, checking over my shoulder. What do you think we'd be delivering, though? What type of crap warrants being paid that much? Henry shrugged. No idea. If it's anything illegal, I doubt we would be held accountable for it, if that's what you're referring to. I sighed, walking down one of the nearest aisles. There had to be at least 100 boxes in this aisle alone. What type of stuff could it be even in there? I almost didn't notice the man in front of me. He was a heavy black man with a beard thicker and longer than David's. This man was looking directly at me. Good morning, young man. I nodded, startled. Hey! I thought you guys were closed today. The man smirked, turning back to the boxes on the shelves. We are. You must be one of the new arrivals. I nodded slowly, checking over my shoulder. Henry was nowhere to be found. Yeah, I am. How did you know about that? The man chuckled. Word spreads fast around here, son. I nodded again, beginning to feel on edge once more. I see. The man cleared his throat. I hear you've received the honor of meeting David on your first day here? Yeah, he seems like a nice guy, I said, crossing my arms. The man chuckled. That's an understatement. I laughed along, quickly realizing that the man was no longer doing the same. I nervously nodded, turning back around. I should go find my friend. It was nice to meet you. The man smiled, giving me a brief nod. Likewise, Thomas. I hope you make the best choice for yourself today. I turned then, walking briskly back towards Henry. I turned the corner, seeing Henry standing by the front door, speaking once more to David. Another man was now walking into the building, a woman just a few steps ahead of him. I gave the woman a polite smile as she passed. The woman returned my gaze with a look of what could only be described as confusion. I had no idea what she could have been thinking at the time. Now, from this point on is where the majority of my concerns began to rise. I made brief eye contact with the man who followed closely behind the woman. His eyes immediately darted away from my own, now glued to the back of the woman's head. He acted like he had never seen me before in his life. But I swore that I knew this man. I was sure I had seen him before, staring at me through my apartment's kitchen window. I spun on my heel, watching the man as he slowly crossed the warehouse. The woman still inches ahead of him. The man looked shockingly like the one I had seen running down the street the night before. I could feel my heart rate begin to rise. That couldn't be, right? It was just some sort of weird coincidence. I was certain I was just seeing things. The man pulled a card out of his pocket, placing it up to a panel that sat in the wall next to the door. He reached around the woman, pushing the door open. The woman turned back to me one more time before stepping through the doorway, the man shutting the door behind himself as he followed. I turned back to David, who was now staring directly at me. "Is something wrong, Thomas?" I looked back at the door, at the back of the warehouse before shaking my head. No, I'm fine." David smiled, nodding. "Good, your friend here just took up a delivery position," he said, gesturing towards Henry. "What do you say?" Any part of my brain telling me to run was shut down by the part that yearned for the $25 hourly payout. I was being too insane anyways, wasn't I? "You know what? I'm in." "That's fantastic to hear," he said, placing his hand on Henry's shoulder. "You boys will make a fine addition to our family." I sit here writing to you now, wondering if I made a mistake. Part of me wants to believe that everything about David, his company, that man is okay. Part of me wants to believe that the payout is real. The rest of me feels fear. The man in my window, the phone call, it's all too connected to be just coincidental. If that man at the warehouse was outside of my house 2 nights ago, then surely the rest of them had something to do with it. Right? Am I just losing my mind? I was probably just too on edge. Maybe it was just some kids screwing around with me. Anyone can use a voice changer. But David's odd infatuation with religion, that worker's infatuation with David? Am I crazy? I don't know. It all just feels weird to me. That's all. It's hard to explain. I start work tomorrow. I hope I won't need to update you all. Wish me luck.